Welcome. This is Meet the Candidates here on BC TV, and I have with me right now in the studio Ben Mitchell, who is a candidate for U.S. Congress. You're running against our incumbent of many years, Peter Welch, on the Democratic ticket. But I'm kind of curious because for years you have been a Liberty Party candidate. Tell us about that decision to run in the primary on the Democratic ticket.
Well, and just I have been a candidate in. Also, I entered the Republican primary after the unprovoked invasion of Iraq back in 2004. I did enter that primary. I was also Liberty Union at the time, and so this is the second time that I've entered sort of a more typical party, traditional party.
And what's the thought behind that?
Behind this particular moment? Well, it's a variety of things. Some in honor of Peter Diamondstone. You know, somebody has to keep agitating for these ideas of the common good and public welfare. But also, Peter Welch my father spoke very highly of him. He's a really decent man. He's an excellent politician, a fine, skilled lawyer. But he has the fact that he's taking so much corporate money, and the fact that he is in collusion with large industries that don't always have the people's best interest at heart, has become really apparent, and in such a way that he needs to be challenged. He's run unopposed virtually for years now, and somebody has to hold him to account for the slide that he keeps making more and more towards the corporate Democratic Party. When he was in Vermont, he was a progressive, left of center, and very intelligent, and he's become so mainstream that now he's essentially, I feel that at times, or more and more often, our elected representatives are passing laws to protect the perpetrators of crime against the people, from the people. So, for example, voting to or co-sponsoring a bill to protect the pharmaceutical industry from whatever extrajudicial seizures or whatever it's called, so that no longer the Department of Justice is no longer able to freeze accounts so they can go back and do forensics to find out why so many drugs are being diverted into communities. He has eliminated that practice. And I know that wasn't his intention. I know that he's not trying to poison the children of Springfield with pharmaceuticals, but that's what's happening. You know, over the years, I've watched so many of my former students, promising young people who wonderful writers, wonderful thinkers, very little opportunity for them to get jobs. And then, a year later they call me and they say, hey man, my dad's, phone bill's cut off. Is there any way I could borrow some money from you or whatever? And it's the opiates. And it's basically, we need elected representatives who are there to protect the people from the interests of the billionaire class that are just essentially poisoning our food, poisoning our water, and that is really the responsibility. That's why we have a democracy, by the people, for the people, so that the powerful interests have a check against their power, and we've abandoned that responsibility in our democracy at this point. So. The Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution grants Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, and whatnot, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare. That's Article 1 before any of the, before the Second Amendment, certainly. And it's become a dirty word, the idea that we want to tax the population in order to care for the general welfare. That idea has been under attack for generations now. And the fact that even from Vermont, someone who basically runs unopposed in a state that votes for, Bernie Sanders, votes for, he's in a position where he could actually stand up to corporations. He could really make a difference. And instead he decides to work the lawyerly, approach of a scalpel. We'll just sort of shave some things on the margin to make it, to get some, telecommunications contracts for some of my friends or whatever. We need someone who's defending the public welfare.
You've used that term a couple times, public welfare, common good. How do you define that?
in a democracy, we pool our resources. You know, I pay my taxes gladly as a citizen. I pay my taxes, and that money is then used to pay for defense so that we don't get attacked, so that Canada doesn't invade us, or terrorism. And we use that money to hire police and fire and people to protect our interests. And that, to me, is providing for the public good. More and more, they're passing laws that take taxpayers' money and give it in free handouts to large corporations who stuff it into their pockets and use it for whatever malicious intents they may have. And so we need to have, as a core value that we want to make sure that people have food. People are free from the kind of terror that almost all Vermont families live with now. I don't know if you do know what it's like to try to make a living in Vermont.
Yeah.
I mean, the per capita income in Vermont is $30,000 a year. I made 35 last year, so I'm doing a little better than average. But still, when rent is $1,200 a month, when the you have to have a cell phone, you have to have what's called an email just to participate in our economy. You have to have telecommunications. You have to have, otherwise, sure, homeless people cannot get jobs. They can't get a bank account. So if you want to participate in our economy, you have to have a certain standard of, which is the cost of living has increased so much more rapidly than the value of time and the value of labor. That I think that we're abandoning the common good. So that could be anything from, our typical thing to do is to tax money and then to give it to individual corporations who can then say, oh, we're providing for welfare, or we're providing medicine, or whatever it is. But I think that my feeling as a socialist is that we need to invest in public ownership of core industries to protect people from the whims of the free market. This idea of free market, hand of God will come in and save everyone has proven itself to be completely not accurate. It's a religious belief, and it's completely taken over most of the halls of power in our country. And so we need people to stand up against that.
So if you were elected to Congress,
Yes.
give us an example of a few bills that you would put forward in hopes of achieving those goals?
Well, I don't have specific bills written. I've started to in certain cases, but
We'll allow you
but
the
there are a lot of them.
broad
For any idea, there's bills that have been written.
Right.
There's always think tanks filled with people who will come in and promote it, especially if you're. But some core elements where I think we need more public investment for public ownership, energy. The free market is not going to deal with global warming. They're just not. It's the free market's goal is to make as much profit, to squeeze as much money as they can out of the people of Vermont, regardless of the consequences. And that's, if you're beholden to the corporate bottom line and to your shareholders, you're no longer even though they're supposedly people, if they, if corporations are people, then they should be allowed, then they should be subject to capital punishment and be put in jail. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So energy, we need to, so a proposal I've had for a long time is put solar panels on every school, every town office, every public building. And so that now suddenly the taxpayer owns a certain percentage of energy production and the carbon rights, which then they can sell back to corporations who want to pollute the environment, or however the system ends up working out.
Right.
But, and I do believe, like when, back when we had the opportunity to buy the dams back, the dams that the taxpayer paid for back during rural electrification were handed off to private corporations because they always know what to do, who let them fall to the wayside. The people should own those dams, the waterways, and that's your base load, and then solar, so that we can stop creating so much of a carbon footprint. We can wait forever for the private industry to find it profitable to go, do alternative energy, but that's not how it works. In China, when they say, oh, you're not going to sell us soybeans, fine, we'll just plant soybeans. Because that's, they're all out communists. They can just do whatever they want. They say, oh, the people are just going to do that. Here you go, we have soybeans. They don't have to sit around and wait for some company to find it profitable and give them incentives to try to do stuff, which is all just handouts to millionaires. We need to invest as a people. And the time is running out. Everyone knows. All right, so that's climate change, public power. We need public ownership of power production, of alternative power production. Let's see. Another one, public finance, public ownership of finance. I think that every U.S. post office should have banking ability. If you look at the Bank of North Dakota, is owned by the taxpayers of North Dakota. Back right before the Depression, the bankers were really putting the squeeze to the farmers in North Dakota, and they said, we can't take this anymore. They're foreclosing. They're just doing what banks do, which is to try to squeeze us for as much as they can. And they said, from now on, the tax money that comes into North Dakota belongs to the people of North Dakota. And you keep it in a bank, and we're going to loan it to people. And so I think the post office should offer banking, and they should have access to the Treasury, and they can loan it to people. And they have proven themselves that they can run an operation that provides an invaluable service. They can do it without, they're not profitable, they're in the black. They run it, and they do it well. And also having public banking in that way would provide access to banking to people in communities that are untouched by banks, because there's not enough money in the community for them to go in and squeeze people. And so they just stay out of there. And so they're using payday loans and all of that. So that's public ownership of finance. And then the third one is I think that we need to reinstate the public option. Medicare for all, I think, is a really good idea. I support that. Dan Freilich supports that.
Yeah.
Go Dr. Dan. But all we need is a public option. I'm not talking about like nationalizing the oil fields or whatever, some of the things that have happened in other countries when they went socialist. I'm talking about just provide people the option. You can either buy into Medicare, and that'll be one of the options within the market, and you can have a really great system that will take care of your needs. And for a reasonable price, or you can, go buy one of these private insurance plans where they're going to spend at least 20% of the money on advertising and profit and yachts or whatever it is that the insurance industry likes to do with their profit. So you have that choice. So in those are three places where small adjustments to provide a socialist, in other words, publicly owned alternative, can start to stand against the constant increase of the cost of living. While wages stay stagnant, everybody keeps wanting to get a little bit more out of us. And here's some fees, and here's this. And there's nothing to stand against that, because the government's like, well, we're trying to find some way to make it profitable for people to do an alternative. No, we just need public investment and public ownership to put a rock in the ground to stand against this drive towards ever more consolidation of wealth and power.
So what skills do you bring to the job that would help you work with fellow Congress?
You're the first person to ask me that question, because everyone says, always, whatever. What experience do you have? Well, I've been in educational administration for more than 10 years. I run a transition program funded through vocational rehabilitation. So I'm pretty familiar with federal standards, and I'm pretty familiar with going into a room of people with very different opinions of how things should go and trying to find consensus and come up with policy that makes effective change. So actually, I spend a lot more of my time. You'd be surprised how much politics there is in education. None of the teachers out there are surprised by it, but it's almost all politics.
Yeah.
And so, whether that's like teaching in a program that's really successful and has a 100% graduation rate, go Precision Valley program, which then gets cut by the taxpayers because they say, we don't want to pay for this anymore. That's politics too. Right now, we're fighting for our lives. It's a good program. The Impact Academy, it's paid for by the Voc Rehab Department in New Hampshire, and they've just decided carte blanche, we're over budget, we're going to start cutting stuff, which is what the Republicans love to do. Let's just cut stuff so we can prove that we're fiscally responsible. It's a program that's proven itself really effective. It's going well. So now we're scrambling to find bridge funding and whatnot, and there's a lot of politics in my background. So the question is, what I would do that's different is I'm going to stand as a voice for a very alternative approach. It's not, how can we find a way that my rich friends can find profit out of this program? It's how do we find a way to really address the needs in the situation that's going on?
Right. And one thing that would be interesting about your situation is that, and I find this interesting for a lot of folks who work, say, in the House, whether it's at the state or the federal level, is you are a leader in the sense of working on behalf of your constituencies.
Yes.
But you're also a teammate.
I am.
Because you have to work with all those other people. And so I think that's it. If you are approaching people who do not understand what you're talking about, how are you going to move them so you can move the needle?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of everyday life for most people, is having to negotiate those kinds of things. You know, once you get to the federal level, they're always saying, "Oh, this is impossible. If we make this change, these people are going to suffer financially." Well, that's not a problem when we lay off teachers. You know, this is just how we go. So, in terms of how to find consensus, how to build. You know, if you go back to like the whole Getting to Yes Harvard project about negotiations, about finding shared interests, common values, and trying to make incremental change to you know, forward an agenda. And that's like the sausage element of politics. And having worked in public schools and worked in colleges and worked in educational administration, I'm pretty familiar with having to, you know, explain things clearly in a way that won't be immediately rejected. But I think, you know, Bernie is a pretty good example. When he first got down there, he was isolated, you know, and he wasn't always like, you know, effective in the things that he was doing, but he kept talking about things that were important. And some really, you know, whether it's, you know, the earned child tax credit or whatever, the income, that, you know, little incremental changes have a major impact on those of us at the bottom of the income scale who are trying to survive the winter in Vermont, you know. And so just having another voice in that discussion saying, you know, talking about the bottom, you know, if the mean or median income, household income in Vermont is $52,000 a year, that means half the income, households in Vermont are living on less than that. And that's just talking about households, okay? That's with several incomes to get to that 52,000.
Right.
That's the median. The average is something like 75, because we do have a lot of very wealthy people in Vermont who are doing quite well. But most, you know, more than half of the households, I think 60% of the population, cannot afford, when their furnace breaks or their transmission blows, cannot, you know, we're paycheck to paycheck. I am paycheck to paycheck. I'm in a deficit, so I'm always trying to figure out something to sell if anybody needs, you know, whatever. I've sold most of the stuff I have, but still, you know, when you're there, when a challenge comes in, like the, you know, the new furnace or the new whatever, our only choice is to go and seek private financing from a usury corporation. And if you're at the low end of the income, then you probably have very poor credit already, so you're going to be paying 30%. And so it's, you know, pretty much every negative thing that can befall you as a citizen in Vermont is an opportunity for profit for some company that's waiting in the wings to say, "Oh, we have just the thing for you. Here, rent a center.
Right.
You can pay for this for the rest of your life." You know. That's a little far off, I know.
So when it comes to negotiations, though, what are your kind of lines in the sand that you're like, I am not going to cross X line?
This is good. Yeah, I would not vote for anything that is clearly protecting the pharmaceutical industry from being held accountable for the mistakes that they make and for the crimes that they commit. Clearly, they falsified the research to show that, you know, remember all those ads, hey, or all those studies, opiates are not addictive. Don't look at China's history or, you know, any of the, you know, opiates are fine, you know. And now we have a huge opium epidemic, and they're like, gee whiz, I wish we could find some money so that we could get you some other pharmaceuticals to replace the ones that you're addicted to. There's no talk of any kind of treatment. We should be suing. Well, anyway, so there are certain areas where the corporations are clearly trying to make as much money as they can, and they don't care who gets hurt. And that's where we need Peter Welch to stand up and say, no, this is going to harm too many of my constituents. I need to be brave, and I need to say no. I don't care how much money you gave me, you know. But it's hard to do if you feel that you need that money. And I think Dr. Dan has made some really clear points on that as well. I mean, he's really talking about campaign finance. So there are certain lines in the sand where I'm here. If I was elected, if, you know, when I get a donation of $50. I feel a lot of responsibility to that person. That I'm, you know, that person trusted me enough to give me $50 to go and talk on television and say this stuff. I'm going to make sure that I think about that person's interests. They're not doing it because they have lots of money. They're doing it because they need someone to represent their interests. And unfortunately, we just don't have that in the House of Representatives anymore.
We were talking a little bit before this show.
I know you want me to talk about my negotiating and political skills, but you know, there's too many dire issues facing the people of Vermont. Well, let's talk about policy and how we can, like, you know, shave a little bit off here. I mean, I'm sure that I would find skills at that.
Well, I think what's important about that is not so much what you're shaving here, there, everywhere. It's
But where you stand.
where do you stand, and where, because you have to walk that balance between sticking to your guns,
Right.
as well as the fact that you are part of a team, and that's the negotiating that can be tricky for some candidates.
I agree, and so I think there's some areas where I'll be well, it's whatever, a fly in the ointment, what, like impeachment. I think that I believe that this is a time, if there were ever a reason, like the Electoral College was designed so that if the people somehow elected someone who was totally incompetent and underprepared for the position and would not serve the interests of the country, the Electoral College could step in and say, we're not going to accept this person.
Right.
That's the only reason it existed, and it failed. That was a real opportunity. That was a place where the Electoral College was actually needed. And I know that the corporate Democrats, their position is we don't want to get into the weeds of this discussion of impeachment because it'll undermine our political capital and it'll make it harder for us to win back the presidency, as it did for the Republicans when they impeached Bill Clinton. And that's the same argument that Peter Welch used back when Peter Shumlin voted in the Senate to impeach George W. Bush for the unprovoked invasion of a sovereign country in the name of oil, and lying about it and all of that. And Peter Shumlin got the Senate to pass that. And the House of Representatives, had they passed it in Vermont, it would have required a discussion on the floor of the House of Representatives in the United States Congress. And that's a discussion that needed to go on. And Peter Welch had just been elected, and he called up all of his friends in the House, including my father said, it's really not a good time to be working towards impeachment because it's going to use up our political capital. We just got into power. And so, no, we're not going to do that right now. And the same thing he said, like, what was it? Peter Welch, House Resolution 646 last term would have called for discussion of impeachment on the floor of House of Representatives, and Peter Welch decided to vote even against having the discussion. And he says, well, we want to let Mueller, take his time. Mueller is the same guy who actually did the 9/11 Commission. So he will come out with a big report, but what will that happen? The only thing that is going to stop I can't even say his name, Donald Trump from continuing to destroy the rule of law, undermine all of our traditional allies who share our values, to pull out of the human rights. We're talking about child internment camps. Child internment camps. Oh, we want to let the prosecutor do his work. We don't want to make any waves. It's like, no, this is child internment camps. This is not a time to sit back and let the process unfold and, scalpel off a few things here and there. This is a time to stand up and have courage and say, this is not America. We do not put children into internment camps. My father came here as an Irish immigrant, and we welcomed him with open arms, and he went to Dartmouth, and he did really well, and he believed in this country. And then when he voted for civil unions on the floor of the Vermont House of Representatives, he said it was so proud that he was able to extend the freedom that he'd been extended as an immigrant to this country to a new group of population. And that's what we do in America. We're not just about our corporate sponsors and the profits of the few who are, gonna trickle it down. It's not trickling down. It's hard to live here in Vermont. And we need somebody to stand up to this guy and say, no, this is not America. We do not intern children. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just on the tip of the iceberg.
So why,
Yes.
I can tell you're very passionate about
Yes.
this. So why throw yourself into the fray?
Well, because I'm a glutton for punishment, or there's something wrong with my brain. I have no idea. No, really, because in honor of Peter Diamondstone, who gave his life to keeping these ideas alive in the discussion, in honor of my grandmother. My grandmother was the postmaster of Marlborough, Vermont, when she was blacklisted as a communist. And she lost her job. It really threw her life. And they took her in at the Putney School, and she worked at the Lower Farm in honor of Eugene Debs, who got 30% of the population to think that Social Security was a good idea and made it possible for all of us to now have that. Well, we'll see if we still have it after they get finished with it. In honor of all the people who've stood up for the right of minority groups, the disenfranchised, people who, drug addicts, people with learning disabilities. I have dyslexia and ADHD. People who are at the margins of our society need someone to champion them. And it's not even part of the discussion anymore. When the most liberal state in Vermont sends a representative and he's like, well, I think pharma has a good point. We got to help them. They need to make a living. We got to keep it profitable for them or else it won't be good. I think that it's time for us to stand up. And so, in this particular case, Peter Welsh, you need to be there for us as your constituents, and you need to work for us. And if you don't, then you're gonna have to listen to this from me. Okay, that's how it goes. I'm not gonna raise $2 million. I can't compete with your corporate sponsors, but I can compete with you in a debate, and I look forward to it. Hi, Peter.
Has he offered to take on a debate?
No, of course not. No, we will be debating on VPR. And I imagine he'll be there on the 9th. And then Channel 17 is also having a debate, so I hope he'll show up for that.
If people want to find out more about you or your platform, where can they find information?
All right, so mitchellforcongress.org is my website. And I do also have Facebook and other social media. But there you have a lot of the sort of things that I've written. I've been writing a lot of articles. You can Google me. I'm pretty conspicuous. And I do accept money. When I was Liberty Union, I never accepted money, but I am actually trying to move around the state and things like that. And I actually had a really, really great team early on, and it was really feeling like we were gaining traction. And then this fundraiser joined us and came in, and he was going to raise all this money, and instead he just started attacking everyone, and he broke up my team.
Oh,
so
dear.
so we're in a regroup. But I do have some, I have great. Communications director Vince Chaffee, Marcella Eversole is my campaign manager. My Bill Boardman is sort of my chief policy advisor, and he's really a remarkably good writer and a remarkably intelligent guy. So I think I would love to be able to raise some money. So if you want to join, you can go to my website and you can join the campaign, you can volunteer, or you can contribute from there. Thank you for that. I wouldn't have plugged it at all if you hadn't mentioned it.
You are so welcome. Ben Mitchell, it was really wonderful having you on the show. I wish you luck on the campaign, and I wish you luck stirring up these ideas and starting conversations.
Well, I really appreciate it. And it's really nice to see you again. I love your work, and I hope you keep doing it. And thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you, BCTV.
Yeah, thank you, BCTV. Keep up the good work.